The woke have even turned the homeless into a political identity group, as opposed to liberals, old school liberals, who just want to get them off the street, which now is seen as kind of judgy, like, don't disturb them in their natural habitat. They're just living their best life under the bridge. The woke think the number one job is to protect homeless people from stigma. I think the number one job is to protect them from rain.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, Trump Tuesday, March the 5th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and a selection from former President Donald Trump. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
We're living in a country that's the finest place on earth, but some folks don't appreciate this land that gave them birth. I hear that up in Washington they're having an awful fuss, 'cause communists and spies are making monkeys out of us. The bureaus and departments have been busy night and day. They're figuring out just how we gave our secrets all away. And Congress has appointed a committee, so they said, to find out who's American and who's a low-down red. They call him up to Washington to speak for Uncle Sam, but when they ask them what they are, they shut up like a clam. I wish they'd take and put me on the witness stand today. I'd shout so loud old Stalin could hear me all the way. I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own. Our government is bigger than it ever was today. The more they hire to work for it, the more they have to pay. Our public servants should be proud and honest, you would think, instead of taking bribes and dressing up their wives and men. The taxes keep on going up, of that there is no doubt, but still they just can't take it in as fast as they dish it out. Our national debt is monster size and growing every day. Our children's children still unborn are gonna have to pay. Our dollar used to be the soundest money on this earth, but now $2 won't even buy one good dollar's worth. Unless we stop inflation and take care of what we've got, the communists may win the fight and never fire a shot. Oh, I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own.
Thank you. A little bit of Mafia action.
Well, you fast forward to 2019, and now Giuliani is Trump's main lawyer.
Right.
Did you deal with Trump at all?
You know, I met Trump, probably won't even remember, but I met him with Roy Cohn. You know, we met at, I forget the club. There was a private club that Roy used to go to. I met Donald, and we said hello. We exchanged niceties and so on and so forth. And way back when, you know, myself and David Bogatin, who was one of my Russian associates, we bought, condos in Trump Towers, you know, when it was being built, or way back at the time, early 80s. So, I had that kind of an encounter with him. But, let me get this out right away. Trump was not associated with the mob. Didn't have relationships. Trump was a developer in New York. And any developer in New York had to deal with mob guys or mob associates because they dealt with the unions, and every union was mobbed up. Every union, every local, every union. So in order to get things done, you had to deal with us in some way, shape, or form. Didn't mean that you were part of our life. We didn't go out to socialize and have dinner. We did with some. Jerry Gutterman was one of them. Big developer that I, had a lot of relationships with. He eventually went to jail, but, I worked personally with him. But Donald wasn't one of those guys.
So the Teamsters were essentially run by the mob?
At that time, yes.
And Jimmy Hoffa was a close associate with the mob as well.
He was.
And that's how you guys kind of got in that whole situation. And the Teamsters were a huge union. It was all the truck drivers and everything, right?
That's correct.
And so you guys control the unions. You also control the docks.
That's correct.
Okay. So you guys really had your hands in a lot of things. If you guys wanted to stop New York City, you essentially could do it.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, look, you control the Teamsters. You control trucks moving all over the country. Goods being shipped all over the country. You call a major Teamster strike, you cause a lot of damage. You also have, understand this, same thing with the docks. You call a strike on the docks, nothing gets moved in and out of the country. You can cripple the country in that way. Aside from that, just think of the amount of money that those unions had in their pension funds and how valuable that could be to mob-related industry where many guys couldn't go to a bank and get money, but they can go to a Jimmy Hoffa and say, hey, we need X amount of dollars to build a hotel in Vegas. And Jimmy could approve it, and that's it. You got the money. So politicians realize that too. And that's why they tried to get close to us to get the benefit of what we can do as a result of our controlling the unions. So you control the unions in this country. You control a major part of our political landscape as well as a major part of business.
I mean, in 2019, is there any criminal element in the Teamsters that you know about, or is it completely legit now?
There are still locals that are in some way controlled by the mob, and there will always be that way. As far as, at the top level, I can't talk to, what might be going on at this point in time now. I'll tell you this, I never put it past my former associates to work their way back into this situation. I don't, because they're very, that's what we do. I don't know how the young guys are as capable as guys like us were, but, we had a way to get around people and do our bidding or have them do our bidding for us. I'll tell you this, I saw The Irishman. I don't know if you've seen it, Scorsese's new film.
Not yet. I heard it was great.
It was good. It wasn't epic. It wasn't The Godfather. It wasn't Goodfellas. I don't think it was in that level. And I can tell you that the story was a complete lie. There's no truth to the story. Yes, certain little things that happened were, but Sheehan did not kill Jimmy Hoffa. And that whole thing, he's been disproved, so often by law enforcement and everybody else. I'm not dissuading people from seeing the movie because it's a movie. It's Hollywood. It's entertainment. But it's not a truthful depiction of what happened.
And that was Michael Franzese and a little Mafia action. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the patriotic shorts.
After we got the call from the White House, Mark Sasseville looked at me and said, "Lucky, you're with me." I remember running down after Sass down into our life support, where all of our life support gear was, all of our flight gear. And Sass said that he would ram his jet into the cockpit. I would ram my jet into the tail of the aircraft. The reason why Sass would aim for the cockpit was to take out the terrorists and the flight controls, and I would take out the tail of the aircraft, because without the tail, an aircraft becomes aerodynamically unbalanced and will just dive straight into the ground. When I first realized that we might have to ram our jets into an airliner threat, that this could potentially be a suicide mission, I thought about Pearl Harbor. I thought about the long line of not just airmen, but all service members who have answered the call. And although in the military we don't plan on doing suicide missions, if this was what my nation needed to do, that was my purpose. That was why the universe had put me there. I had peace with it.
This is the world's first ever vertical takeoff and landing jet. Its jump ability on aircraft carriers is insane. Let me explain. This is the Harrier jump jet. First flown in the late 1960s, the Harrier has had new upgrades that have increased safety, range, and lethality. Today, you will see the newer version, known as the AV-8B Harrier II. Operated by the United States Marine Corps and other allies, the U.S. Harrier Squadron can be given almost any mission. Their objectives include engaging and neutralizing both surface and aerial targets and providing escort for helicopters. With its unique design, the Harrier can be flown from small aircraft carriers and large assault ships. However, Harriers don't normally take off vertically. Instead, they perform something called a short takeoff. This method means the aircraft can lift off with a full payload of fuel and weapons. Vertical takeoffs are limited by engine thrust and struggle to hold the weight of fully fueled and armed Harriers.
During the Vietnam War, wild weasel missions were notoriously dangerous. This is how the first successful mission went down. In December 1965, a two-seater F-100 was sent out on a wild weasel mission to destroy a North Vietnamese SA-2 site. The reason these missions were so dangerous was because the crew had to allow enemy radar to target them in order to draw out enemy artillery. Being fired upon was pretty much part of the job description. This particular F-100 was flying with 4 F-105s when the crew started detecting activity from a North Vietnamese radar, meaning they'd been picked up. Flying as low as 300 feet and using ground cover to mask their approach, the crew soon spotted a thatched roof hut with 3 white missiles sticking out of it. They fired off a series of rockets, but when those missed, they switched to their cannons, taking out one of the missiles. The F-105s then swooped in and finished off the other missiles with their own rockets. Unlike many of these types of missions, the men returned to base without a single casualty.
Burwers he was a private first class like me. He was shot and went down. Finally, McGowan was standing over talking whether we were going to get him out of there or not, because he was hit several times. We finally just said, McGowan, is this guy alive? And he said, yes, but just barely. And she said, well, if he's alive, we're going to try to get him out of here. We did. We got Burwers out of there. He was evacuated. He went to the hospital ship, and they repaired him. 3 months later, he was back in the company, regular duty.
Did you know that in Band of Brothers, there is a scene where the paratroopers are given a new piece of equipment called leg bags to use on their jump? This scene accurately reflects the historical reality of how the leg bags were introduced and used by the American soldiers. Leg bags were a British invention that were designed to help the paratroopers carry more gear and weapons on their mission. The idea was that the bag would be attached to the soldier's leg with a 15-foot rope, and the soldier could put any heavy or bulky items in the bag. Then, when the soldier was about to land, he could release the bag and let it drop to the ground before him, reducing the risk of injury from the impact. However, this ingenious concept did not work out as planned. Unfortunately, the rope was not strong enough to withstand the force of the jump, and it would frequently break before the soldier reached the ground, causing the bag to drift away from the soldier. The paratrooper would then be left without the essential equipment that he needed for his mission.
Michael quickly ran home and told my father to quickly put the radio on. He put the radio on in time for us to hear President Franklin D. Roosevelt saying, "A state of war exists between the Empire of Japan and the United States of America." At that moment, my father turned around. He called his 4 sons. I was the middle boy. He said, "Boys," he said, "they won't take me because I'm too old. But I expect my sons to..." We said, "We know, Papa, they won't take us till we're 18. And he said, "I know." He said, "But I just want you boys to know how I feel about it. No place in this entire world can you come to a place with nothing except a willingness to work. And look at us today, a family, 8 children, we have a home and a car." He said, "Boys, this country must not fail."
Turkey's new 5th-generation fighter jet is finally here. It has just flown for the first ever time. This is the Khan by Turkish Aerospace Industries. With this jet, Turkey will become the 5th nation to create a 5th-generation fighter. It measures 21 meters long, 6 meters tall, and 14 meters wide. The final version will cost at least $100 million to complete. It is expected to have a range of 680 miles, fly to a height of 55,000 feet, and reach a maximum speed of Mach 1.8. There are 2 General Electric F-110 GE 129 turbo engines powering the current prototype. But due to these weaker engines, the current model is worse than the F-35. An F-35 has 190 kilonewtons of thrust, while a single Khan engine with an afterburner only generates 130 kilonewtons of thrust. Even though the Khan has 2 engines, it will make it less stealthy. However, the design is similar to both the F-35 and the F-22.
He landed on Juno Beach in the early hours of June 6, 1944, among the first wave of men to hit the sand, part of the 13th Field Regiment of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. He was Lieutenant James Montgomery Dewan, and upon landing at Juno Beach, he took out 2 German snipers while leading his men to higher ground through a field of anti-tank mines. It was during a night patrol when he was ambushed and shot 6 times, including once in the chest, which miraculously ricocheted off a silver cigarette case given to him by his brother just weeks earlier. His right finger was amputated on the spot, and he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. The world would come to know him as Scotty, the resourceful engineer on the USS Enterprise in the original Star Trek series and movies. James Doohan passed away in 2005 at the age of 85. In 2008, some of his ashes were smuggled aboard and hidden on the International Space Station's Columbus module.
I got into the operating room and I was like, okay, I made it. I can let go. If I die right now, they'll bust out a crash cart. They can bring me back. But, I've got all the people here. They've got the tools. They've got the talent. And I was letting go and drifting off. And I felt this tug on my left side. And this nurse yells out, "He's still got a bomb on him." So they had removed all my gear, but they had missed this grenade. And they don't like explosives in the operating room. They are trained that if there are explosives, they clear the operating room. And they have somebody who's trained to get rid of it. Here I am, I'm dying. And he's got a bomb on him. And it looked like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon, like Roadrunner, nothing but clouds of dust. And I'm in there alone. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. The last thought I remember was, oh my God, what a bad day.
During the Battle of the Eastern Solomons in August 1942, battleship North Carolina and aircraft carrier Enterprise are found by Admiral Nagumo's first strike of 27 dive bombers and 10 fighters. Without the cover of combat air patrol, it was up to the anti-aircraft gunners to fend off the attacking planes. Because of cloud cover, gunners didn't spot the dive bombers until they pushed over, at which point the whole task force of 9 ships opened fire. Filing in astern of the Enterprise, North Carolina's impressive anti-aircraft battery of 50 caliber 20 millimeter 1.1 inch and 5-inch guns sounded like a steady drum roll as she laid a blanket of steel over the carrier. Witnesses were convinced she had caught fire. The intensity of the barrage astonished both sides. The planes attacked at intervals of 7 seconds for almost 4 minutes. The carrier twisted and turned at full speed, leaving the slower North Carolina behind. Planes foolish enough to take swing at the battleship paid a high price, as not a single plane that attacked North Carolina returned to its carrier.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a little motivation.
Yeah, the funny thing is, if you're trying to stop drinking, you need something better than alcohol. And alcohol is pretty good.
Yeah.
So you better find something a lot better, man. Yeah, and then it is. And then esteemable people do esteemable things. It's like, yeah, well, you want to figure out something that you're doing with your life that's worth not getting drunk and screwing up.
Yeah.
Part of the reason people drink alcohol is to get rid of their responsibility. I mean, that's, you hear people drink because they have problems. It's like, no. Some people drink because they're anxious, and alcoholics drink because they're in withdrawal. But young people drink because they're sick and tired of being responsible, because it's annoying. It's like, so I'll drink enough, I won't care about the medium to long-term consequences, because alcohol, that's exactly what alcohol does. It doesn't make you ignorant of the medium to long-term consequences, but it makes you not care about them. you might say, well, why do people drink too much? It's like, if you like alcohol, that's a stupid question, right? It's like, why do people drink too much? Well, because it's great.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so why stop? Well, you do stupid things when you're drunk. You hurt yourself. You compromise your health. It's really hard on the people around you. You tend to turn into a liar, and it screws up your life.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but it's pretty fun. Yeah, well, it is, but you need something better than that. And what's better isn't being straight and not making mistakes. It's like, that's all prohibition in some sense. What's better is, no, you need an adventure, man. You need to get out there and have something to do.
Yeah.
And something worth waking up for. And that's the substitute for the addiction. Actually, the addiction is the substitute for that, if truth be known. If you are an effective writer and speaker and communicator, you have all the authority and competence that there is. The best thing you can do is read and write every day, a couple of hours every day. Write about things you find important and see if you can discover what you believe to be true. And that'll build you a foundation. And it's unbelievably practical. Like, if you look at people who are phenomenally successful across life, there's various reasons, but one of them is that they're unbelievably good at articulating what they're aiming at, and strategizing and negotiating and enticing people with a vision forward. It's like, get your words together, man. That makes you unstoppable. Get your words together. Make yourself an articulate creature, and then you're deadly in the best possible way. Read great books. Really, man. And you've got these unbelievable libraries that are full of the writings of people who are intelligent and articulate beyond comprehension. And and you can go there and you can learn all this. And you might think, well, why should you learn it? There's nothing more powerful than someone who is articulate and who can think and speak. It's power. And I mean power of the best sort. It's authority and influence and respectability and competence. And your highest skill is to be found in articulated speech. And if you're a master at formulating your arguments, you win everything. And better than that, when you win everything, everyone around you wins too. Because to transform yourself into, let's consider your transformation into something approximating the logos. It means you shine a light on the whole world. Well, there's nothing more exciting to do than that. There's nothing better you can possibly do. You transform yourself into something that's articulated and sensible and grounded in history and knowledgeable and wise, man. You can do anything you want, and hopefully anything you want for good. Because if you have any sense, everything you want to do would be for the good, because there's nothing more compelling or meaningful or useful in combating the tragedy of life than to struggle with all your soul on behalf of the good. I've really seen the benefits, for example, for weightlifting, because I've watched people, because I'm 58 and 50, how old am I? 56. I've really noticed the difference between people when they age, between people who laid down a good physiological platform when they were young and those who didn't. Because if you haven't worked out weights, particularly, I would say, you start to get pretty soft in your 30s and your cardiovascular system starts to go, and really early. The other thing, too, is the best thing you can do to maintain cognitive ability isn't to do exercises like lumosity. It's not brain exercises that keep you sharp. It's exercise. So if you're 50, both cardiovascular and weightlifting, if you're 50, you can restore your cognitive function to the level of a 30-year-old through exercise.
Through physical activity.
Yeah, well, your brain is a very demanding organ. And if your cardiovascular system is compromised, then you get stupid. And so, it's really...
So the less you move and the bigger you get, the more stupid you become.
Yeah, well, because you compromise its function. Because the brain is, it's the organ that uses more. It's very metabolically demanding. And so if you're not in good physical shape, then one of the things that suffers most greatly is your cognitive function. No one can live without a routine. You just forget that. If you guys don't have a routine, I would recommend, you get one going, because you cannot be mentally healthy without a routine. You need to pick a time to get up. Whatever time you want, but pick one and stick to it, because otherwise you dysregulate your circadian rhythms and they regulate your mood. I've told people to learn to use a schedule. And people often hate schedules because they act as their own tyrants, right? They say, well, you have to do this, unpleasant thing, and then here's another unpleasant thing you have to do, and then you have to do this unpleasant thing, and you do that for about 3 days, and you think, to hell with this, I'm not doing that, and you fall off the wagon. That isn't what you're supposed to do with a schedule. You're supposed to use it to design the days that you would like to have if you were taking care of yourself. You wake up in the morning and you think, here's 5 things I have to do that if I don't do, my life will be worse. It's like paying bills, for example, or taking out the garbage. It's like you have to do those because otherwise things degenerate. So you got to put some of those in the schedule because otherwise tomorrow is worse than today, and that's a bad trajectory. But you also want to build in things, you've got to act in some sense like you're dealing with a relatively recalcitrant 9-year-old. It's like, here's some things you have to do, but here's some things that if you do, you could reward yourself with. And if you get the balance there between obligation and reward right, then you'll find that you're motivated to do the things. And that's what you want to do. You want to do that so it's sustainable across days and weeks and months. And so you got to treat yourself like a good boss would treat a valued employee, and not like a tyrant would treat a slave. Make friends with a calendar, like Google Calendar or something like that. And I can tell you some tricks about that, because really it is important. And I'm not kidding around about this. So here's one way of thinking about making use of a schedule. Often people are afraid of schedules because they think of them as a trap. You make a schedule and that's like this little prison that you have to live inside. And all you're doing in your schedule is putting down things you have to do or should do. And so, there's not a lot of fun in that. And so not only is it a trap or a prison, but it's kind of an unpleasant one. But a way to work with the schedule in a lot more sophisticated way is to think, well, I'm going to plan the next week, say, because you plan it day by day, but we'll take the week as the unit level of analysis and think, I'd like to plan a week I'd like to have. And then your schedule all of a sudden becomes a tool for increasing the quality of your life. And that's a whole different issue.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the daily law for March the 5th.
March 5th. Look wider and think further ahead. In any competitive environment in which there are winners or losers, the person who has the wider, more global perspective will inevitably prevail. The reason is simple. Such a person will be able to think beyond the moment and control the overall dynamic through careful strategizing. Most people are perpetually locked in the present. Their decisions are overly influenced by the most immediate event. They easily become emotional and ascribe greater significance to a problem than it should have in reality. Moving toward mastery will naturally bring you a more global outlook, but it is always wise to expedite the process by training yourself early on to continually enlarge your perspective. You can do so by always reminding yourself of the overall purpose of the work you are presently engaged in and how this meshes with your long-term goals. In dealing with any problem, you must train yourself to look at how it inevitably connects to a larger picture. If your work is not having the desired effect, you must look at it from all angles until you find the source of the problem. You must not merely observe the rivals in your field, but dissect and uncover their weaknesses. Look wider and think further ahead must be your motto. Through such mental training, you will smooth the path to mastery while separating yourself ever further from the competition. Daily law. The person with the more global perspective wins. Expand your gaze. Mastery, Chapter 6. Fuse the intuitive with the rational. Mastery.
And that was the daily law for March the 5th from the book The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Stop running away from the hound of heaven. Right, that line from the marvelous Francis Thompson poem. I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the years. I fled him down the labyrinthine ways of my own mind. That's the soul that's running from God. But God isn't just out there waiting for us. He's the hound of heaven galloping after us. All right, stop and let yourself be found. That's the point.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, capitalism and altruism are incompatible. They are philosophical opposites. They cannot coexist in the same man or in the same society. Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
That would deny the insurgents their cause, and they would die of isolation. Lansdale thought it folly to imagine that leftist rebels could be defeated by force. In fact, force just played into their hands, giving them a cause they could use to rally support. For insurgents, isolation from the people is death. Think of the people in your group who are working primarily for their own interests as insurgents. They are Cassius types who thrive on discontent in the organization, fanning it into dissension and factionalism. You can always work to divide such factions once you know about them. But the better solution is to keep your soldiers satisfied and contented, giving the insurgents nothing to feed on. Bitter and isolated, they will die off on their own. The divide and rule strategy is invaluable in trying to influence people verbally. Start by seeming to take your opponent's side on some issue, occupying their flank. Once there, however, create doubt about some part of their argument, tweaking and diverting it a bit. This will lower their resistance and maybe create a little inner conflict about a cherished idea or belief. That conflict will weaken them, making them vulnerable to further suggestion and guidance. Japan's great 17th century swordsman Miyamoto Musashi on several occasions faced bands of warriors determined to kill him. The sight of such a group would intimidate most people, or at least make them hesitate, a fatal flaw in a samurai. Another tendency would be to lash out violently, trying to kill as many of the attackers as possible all at once, but at the risk of losing control of the situation. Musashi, however, was above all else a strategist, and he solved these dilemmas in the most rational way possible. He would place himself so that the men would have to come at him in a line or at an angle. Then he would focus on killing the first man and move swiftly down the line. Instead of being overwhelmed or trying too hard, he would break the band into parts. Then he just had to kill opponent number 1, while leaving himself in position to deal with opponent number 2, and preventing his mind from being clouded and confused by the other attackers awaiting him. The effect was that he could retain his focus while keeping his opponents off balance, for as he proceeded down the line, they would become the ones who were intimidated and flustered. Whether you are beset by many small problems or by one giant problem, make Musashi the model for your mental process. If you let the complexity of the situation confuse you and either hesitate or lash out without thought, you will lose mental control, which will only add momentum to the negative force coming at you. Always divide up the issue at hand, first placing yourself in a central position, then proceeding down the line, killing off your problems one by one. It is often wise to begin with the smallest problem while keeping the most dangerous one at bay. Solving that one will help you create momentum, both physical and psychological, that will help you overwhelm all the rest. The most important thing is to move quickly against your enemies, as the Athenians did at Marathon. Waiting for troubles to come to you will only multiply them and give them a deadly momentum. Reversal. Dividing your forces as a way of creating mobility can be a powerful strategy, as Napoleon demonstrated with his flexible system of corps,
which let him hit his enemy unpredictably from many different angles. But to make his system work, Napoleon needed precise coordination of its parts and overall control over their movements. And his goal was ultimately to bring the parts together to strike a major blow. In guerrilla warfare, a commander will disperse his forces to make them harder to hit, but this too demands coordination. A guerrilla army cannot succeed if the parts are unable to communicate with each other. In general, any division of your forces must be temporary, strategic, and controlled. In attacking a group in order to sow division, be careful that your blow is not too strong, for it can have the opposite effect, causing people to unite in times of great danger. That was Hitler's miscalculation during the London Blitz, his bombing campaign designed to push England out of World War II. Intended to demoralize the British public, the Blitz only made them more determined. They were willing to suffer short-term danger in order to beat him in the long run. This bonding effect was partly the result of Hitler's brutality, partly the phenomenon of a culture willing to suffer for the greater good. Finally, in a divided world, power will come from keeping your own group united and cohesive, and your own mind clear and focused on your goals. The best way to maintain unity may seem to be the creation of enthusiasm and high morale, but while enthusiasm is important, in time it will naturally wane. And if you have come to depend on it, you will fail. Far greater defenses against the forces of division are knowledge and strategic thinking. No army or group can be divided if it is aware of the enemy's intentions and makes an intelligent response. As Samuel Adams discovered, strategy is your only dependable sword and shield. Here are further reflections on the strategy of divide and conquer. From The Campaigns of Napoleon by David G. Chandler. There were, however, many occasions when the French were faced not by one but by two or a whole series of enemy armies within supporting distance of one another. Faced with such a difficult situation, Napoleon often adopted a second system of maneuver, the strategy of the central position. Very often under these circumstances, the French found themselves operating at a numerical disadvantage against the combined strength of their opponents, but could procure superior numbers against any one part of their adversary's forces. It was this second factor that the system was designed to exploit to the full. The art of generalship consists in, when actually inferior in numbers to the enemy overall, being superior to him on the battlefield. In brief, Napoleon set himself the task of isolating one part of the enemy armament, concentrating a stronger force to ensure its defeat, and if possible, its destruction, and then turning with his full strength to attack the second enemy army. That is to say, instead of a single decisive blow, he planned a series of smaller blows against scattered adversaries, and set out to destroy them in detail. How could this be done? Once again, the sequence of the Napoleonic attack reveals the formula. First of all, the emperor would accumulate as much information about the forces facing him from captured newspapers, deserters, and most especially from the indications brought in by his probing cavalry patrols. From the data thus provided, he would carefully plot the known dispositions of his foes on the map, and then select the place where their respective army boundaries converged. This was the hinge or joint of the enemy's strategic dispositions, and as such was vulnerable to attack. This point would be selected by Napoleon for his initial blitzkrieg attack, carried out as often as not in full strength. Shielded by the cavalry screen, the French army would perform a crash concentration and fall like a thunderbolt on the handful of troops defending this central point. Invariably, this initial onslaught would be successful. Immediately Napoleon had massed his army at this newly captured point, he was master of the central position. That is to say, he had successfully interposed his concentrated army between the forces of his enemies, who ideally would have staggered back under the impact of the surprise blow in such a way as to increase the distance between their respective armies. This would inevitably mean that the foe would have to operate on exterior lines, i.e., have greater distances to march from one flank to the other, while the better positioned French would have a shorter distance to travel to reach either enemy. From Clausewitz on Strategy, by Tiha von Kietze, Bolko von Oettinger, and Christopher Basford. A novice chess player soon learns that it is a good idea to control the center of the board. This recognition will recur, in novel disguises, in situations far from the chessboard. It may help to seek the equivalent of the center of the board in any situation, or to see that the role of the center has migrated to the flanks, or to realize that there is no board and no singular topology. From the book of Luke, every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and a divided household falls. And if Satan also is divided against himself, how will his kingdom stand? From Aesop's Fables, The 3 Oxen and the Lion. There were 3 oxen who always grazed together. A lion had his designs upon them and wanted to eat them, but he could never get at one of them because they were always together. So he set them against each other with slanderous talk and managed to get them separated, whereupon they were isolated and he was able to eat them one after the other. From Roosevelt, The Lion and the Fox, by James McGregor Burns. Roosevelt disliked being completely committed to any one person. He enjoyed being at the center of attention and action, and the system made him the focus through which the main lines of action radiated. The main reason for Roosevelt's methods, however, involved a tenacious effort to keep control of the executive branch in the face of the centrifugal forces of the American political system. By establishing in an agency one power center that counteracted another, he made each official more dependent on White House support. The president, in effect, became the necessary ally and partner of each. He lessened bureaucratic tendencies towards self-aggrandizement. He curbed any attempt to gang up on him. He was, in effect, adapting the old method of divide and conquer to his own purposes. His technique was curiously like that of Joseph Stalin, who used the overlapping delegation of function, a close student of his methods has said, to prevent any single chain of command from making major decisions without confronting other arms of the state's bureaucracy, and thus bringing the issues into the open at a high level. Roosevelt, like Stalin, was a political administrator in the sense that his first concern was power, albeit for very different ends. From the book of Matthew. Do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. And lastly, from Aesop's Fables, The Plowman's Quarrelsome Sons. A plowman's sons were always quarreling. He scolded them to no avail. His words did nothing to change their ways. So he decided to teach them a practical lesson. He asked them to bring him a load of firewood. As soon as they had done this, he gave a bundle to each and told them to break it all up for him. But in spite of all their efforts, they were unable to do so. The plowman therefore undid the bundles and handed each of his sons a stick at a time. These they broke without any trouble. So, said the father, you too, my children, if you stay bound together, can be invincible to your enemies. But if you are divided, You will be easy to defeat.
And that was the end of Chapter 17, Defeat Them in Detail, from the 33 Strategies of War. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you are a Democrat, you should be voting Republican because the Republican Party is the true party of civil rights. It always has been. It was the party of civil rights in the Civil War, and right after the Civil War, it is the party that came up with the first three civil rights bills, all that were killed by Democrats, by the way. So it's the Republican Party that has always been about civil rights. So if you as a Democrat are interested in civil rights, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. Question. If the border is broken, then how did the Biden administration allow it to become broken? What does the Biden administration promise to do to fix the broken border? If the Republican Party is blocking his plans, then why doesn't he simply write an executive order? If it is true that anything that the Biden administration wants bad enough it finds a way of getting, then doesn't it follow that the only reason that the border remains broken is because the administration doesn't want it fixed? Back in a minute. Thank you. You must frame the argument correctly if you want to win. Describing the people that live on the street as homeless is wrong. Homelessness describes people that are victims, people that have no place to live because of catastrophic events that are beyond their control. The people that live on the street are self-destructive and should be properly described as trespassers or vagrants or squatters or even bums. Migrants is wrong. Animals migrate. Human beings immigrate and emigrate. People that come to our country are immigrants, and if they have cheated to get here, they are illegal immigrants. Describing a mass murder as a mass shooting is incorrect. A mass shooting is what happens at a gun range. A mass murder is what happens at an elementary school. Back in a minute. Thank you. You must say no. There are three ways to say no. Say no, then negotiate, say yes with conditions. So if you're dealing with one of your kids, parents usually do this. If they can say no, can I have ice cream? No. You can say no, then negotiate. No, you can't have ice cream, but you can have some fruit. Or they say yes with conditions. Yes, you can have ice cream, but only after you've cleaned your plate. You can metaphorically say no by asking questions like, why? Who cares? So what? And saying no is absolutely vital. The word no is the only barrier between us and socialism. Getting in the habit of saying no to your family and friends. If you cannot say no at home, on your own property, then you can't say no anywhere else. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we pick up where we left off with President Trump, the collected speeches.
Our children will grow up in a nation of miracles. But to achieve this future, we must enrich the mind and the souls of every American child. Education is the civil rights issue of our time. I am calling upon members of both parties to pass an education bill that funds school choice for disadvantaged youth, including millions of African American and Latino children. These families should be free to choose the public, private, charter, magnet, religious, or homeschool that is right for them. Joining us tonight in the gallery is a remarkable woman, Denisha Merriweather. As a young girl, Denisha struggled in school and failed third grade twice. But then she was able to enroll in a private center for learning, great learning center, with the help of a tax credit and a scholarship program. Today, she is the first in her family to graduate not just from high school, but from college. Later this year, she will get her master's degree in social work. We want all children to be able to break the cycle of poverty, just like Denisha. But to break the cycle of poverty, we must also break the cycle of violence. The murder rate in 2015 experienced its largest single-year increase in nearly half a century. In Chicago, more than 4,000 people were shot last year alone, and the murder rate so far this year has been even higher. This is not acceptable in our society. Every American child should be able to grow up in a safe community, to attend a great school, and to have access to a high-paying job. But to create this future, we must work with, not against, the men and women of law enforcement. We must build bridges of cooperation and trust, not drive the wedge of disunity and really it's what it is, division. It's pure, unadulterated division. We have to unify. Police and sheriffs are members of our community. They're friends and neighbors. They're mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, and they leave behind loved ones every day who worry about whether or not they'll come home safe and sound. We must support the incredible men and women of law enforcement. And we must support the victims of crime. I have ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims. The office is called VOICE, Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. We are providing a voice to those who have been ignored by our media and silenced by special interests. Joining us in the audience tonight are four very brave Americans whose government failed them. Their names are Jamil Shaw, Susan Oliver, Jenna Oliver, and Jessica Davis. Jamil's 17-year-old son was viciously murdered by an illegal immigrant gang member who had just been released from prison. Jamil Shaw Jr. was an incredible young man with unlimited potential who was getting ready to go to college where he would have excelled as a great college quarterback. But he never got the chance. His father, who is in the audience tonight, has become a very good friend of mine. Jamil, thank you. Thank you. Also with us are Susan Oliver and Jessica Davis. Their husbands, Deputy Sheriff Danny Oliver and Detective Michael Davis, were slain in the line of duty in California. They were pillars of their community. These brave men were viciously gunned down by an illegal immigrant with a criminal record and 2 prior deportations, should have never been in our country. Sitting with Susan is her daughter, Jenna. Jenna, I want you to know that your father was a hero and that tonight you have the love of an entire country supporting you and praying for you. To Jamil, Jenna, Susan, and Jessica, I want you to know that we will never stop fighting for justice. Your loved ones will never, ever be forgotten. We will always honor their memory. Finally, to keep America safe, we must provide the men and women of the United States military with the tools they need to prevent war. If they must, they have to fight, and they only have to win. I am sending Congress a budget that rebuilds the military, eliminates the defense sequester, and calls for one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history. My budget will also increase funding for our veterans. Our veterans have delivered for this nation, and now we must deliver for them. The challenges we face as a nation are great, but our people are even greater. And none are greater or braver than those who fight for America in uniform. We are blessed to be joined tonight by Corinne Owens, the widow of U.S. Navy Special Operator, Senior Chief William Ryan Owens. Ryan died as he lived, a warrior and a hero, battling against terrorism and securing our nation. I just spoke to our great General Mattis just now, who reconfirmed that, and I quote, Ryan was a part of a highly successful raid that generated large amounts of vital intelligence that will lead to many more victories in the future against our enemy. Ryan's legacy is etched into eternity. Thank you.
And that was more from the former President Donald Trump's address to Congress in 2017. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.